Hello and welcome to the program. Top diplomats from Ukraine, Germany, France and Russia have discussed organizing a meeting in the Normandy Format on Ukraine. According to Ukraine's Foreign Minister Vadym Prystayko, the exact date is still unknown. Last month, French President Emmanuel Macron said the leaders of the four countries would hold talks at the end of September. How effective are the negotiations in the Normandy Format? And will the latest talks bring about a lasting ceasefire in eastern Ukraine? Joining us to discuss this and more is Oleksandr Khara, an expert in foreign and security policy at the Maidan of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Khara, thank you so much for coming to our studio. So just to start things off, what's your take on these preliminary talks so far that happened in Berlin?
Well, certainly it's good that we are going to have them because the talks has been frozen for some time. Russia was unwilling to make any moves. They believe that everything is to blame for Ukraine, that Ukraine didn't fulfill obligations under the so-called Minsk agreements. And that's why there is no reason to talk with the previous president. Certainly with the President Zelensky in office, with his new messages to the world and to Russia as well, there is a possibility of moving these talks, at least not in the right direction, at least moving from the dead still. From the other hand, I see no possibility of any let's say, successful talks, given that Russia believes that they have upper hand in the situation, that there is a bit of more pressure from Russia and their partners on Ukraine, and Ukraine will step back and impose let's say, restriction on its sovereignty and will be, let's say, on the course of getting back to the sphere of influence of Russia.
So what do you think needs to happen in order for at least a lasting ceasefire to be achieved during these
We haven't seen any ceasefire since the so-called Minsk Accords has been signed. Russia and their proxies, not separatists, were well violating it and violating each and every day. The recent report from the front line said that one soldier has been killed and one wounded. So we receive these reports each and every day. And Russia is trying to destabilize the situation in the region and certainly trying to put pressure on Ukrainian government with the aim to achieve its political goals over all Ukraine, not just to serve those people on occupied territories.
President Zelensky has recently expressed hope that Washington will also will become more involved in the Normandy Format negotiations, and the U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations, Volker, has also said that the U.S. is ready, and if necessary, it's going to join the talks. President Zelensky also recently met with U.S. Vice President Mike Pence, and we can now see on screen a tweet of his with photographs from the meeting. And he tweeted afterwards, "Under the leadership of President Trump, the relationship between Ukraine and the U.S. has never been stronger." And we can see some of the photos on screen now. Do you think the U.S. will play a larger role in the Ukraine peace negotiations?
It might play a bigger role, but I see no, let's say, good environment for more involvement of Mr. Trump. Firstly, Mr. Trump is voicing some ideas of getting back Russia into the G7 or getting better relations with Russia, which is not, let's say, encouraging for the rest of free world and Ukraine including, because it's mean that Putin is doing all things right. I mean, aggression in Ukraine, in Syria, in Venezuela, in other countries. Secondly, there is no appetite for Trump to do such thing because it's not getting him scores in his political struggle on the eve of the re-election campaign next year. And if Ukraine was a sort of a win case, he would be here. But he does not consider its, let's say, possibility to solve this conflict as soon as possible. At the same time, even with this positive rhetoric, the government of the United States is supporting Ukraine with the economic means, military means, and other.
Right, and so we actually have another photograph from a recent meeting between the U.S. and Ukraine delegations. This one is from the U.S. ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, and there we can see a photograph of the Ukraine delegation and the U.S. delegation. Everyone seems to be quite happy, smiling, and Gordon Sondland wrote, great bilateral meeting between President Zelensky and U.S. Vice President and Secretary Perry and the outstanding Ukraine team. We love Ukraine. Now, that's quite a positive note, certainly grounds for optimism. What do you make of these sort of flurry of meetings between U.S. and Ukraine officials in the latest, over the past couple of weeks?
Well, it's a sort of a honeymoon between the President Zelensky and the American government, for sure. If Zelensky fulfill his promises in fighting corruption, in changing the way how the government is run in Ukraine, certainly there is support from the American side all those changes, and it will open up Ukraine for more American presence here, from the investments to the political support, because if we can compare what Poland is doing to engage the United States more into its affairs, and certainly in the region as well. Recently, the Polish side signed with Americans a document with regard to the 5G things. So the Polish government sided with the United States in their rivalry with China. The same thing in energy supplies, energy independence. Poland invested into the LNG terminal, and now it receives some gas from the United States. It means that they are more independent from the Russian supply than it was before. And actually, one of the key things that President Zelensky brought from his meetings from Warsaw is the memorandum on the building interconnection from this LNG terminal to the Ukrainian pipeline system, which allow us more leverage over the talks with Russia. We still haven't approached any, let's say, agreement with Russia with regard to the transit of Russian gas via Ukrainian territory. And given the pipelines that are being built, like Nord Stream 2 or the Turkish Stream, it means that Ukraine is being bypassed by Russia. It means that there is no security guarantee of Ukraine from the full-scale invasion, because before that the Russians were afraid of disrupting supplies to the Western markets, and now we are losing this leverage over Russia. But with this interconnection to the LNG terminal in Poland, we will have more arguments against Russia. Their manipulative talks and their energy blackmail that we experienced, let's say, 25 years before we agreed with our Western partners to get this Russian gas re-exported to Ukraine. And
Ukraine certainly has done an outstanding job of becoming an independent provider of looking for various sources for energy in other parts of the world. But going back to these past few weeks, the meetings between the Ukrainian and the U.S. delegations, they were happening in the wake of President Trump's comments during the G7 in regards to Russia, and afterwards his administration's it came out that his administration decided to hold up about $250 million worth of aid for Ukraine, which was supposed to be allotted for security assistance. Now, what sort of message does Washington send to Ukraine when on one side you have all these different positive meetings, and then on the other side you have information coming out about the administration's decision to hold up the security aid for Ukraine?
Mm-hmm. And actually it was a two-day news event. On the first day, Politico published the information that the government is revising this package of assistance. And on the second day, there was an article saying that the Pentagon sent a green line to the White House that they should resume this package. And actually, there was a reaction from the ranking member of the Foreign Relations Committee, Bob Menendez, saying that do not, let's say, you should not be worried about disappointing Putin. You need to fulfill American interests first. and then support Ukraine because we guaranteed security and territorial integrity to this country. So I think that we have no problems with it. But at the same time, I should refer to the case of the possible transfer of the technology and the securities of one of the Ukrainian companies that produces engines for helicopters to China. And certainly it's a sensitive issue for Washington, but not just to Washington, to other our partner countries, strategic countries like Japan, Australia, some others. So I believe this signal with regard to the package of military support is connected to the willingness of one of the citizens of Ukraine to transfer the production facilities to China. And I believe there is a good solution to this, to please not just the owner of this enterprise and those workers in this high-tech enterprise of Ukraine, but the government of Ukraine and our allies in the West.
So a clear message in regards to Chinese technology is what you're saying?
Oh, yes, sure. The Chinese ambassador here in Kiev was not happy, and he voiced his concern that the United States are trying to spoil good relations between the two governments, which is not true. Certainly, our government was not doing enough. Actually, I should blame a bit to our government, because what this enterprise is producing is of military and dual-use goods. And according to our legislations, it's up to the government, and we have the export control system, to provide licenses for exporting goods or technologies or even the whole enterprise. Thus, our government should have made some warnings to the owner that it's impossible to transfer because it's not in national interest of Ukraine, and it in contradiction with the national interests of the major partners who support Ukrainian territorial integrity.
And that's very, very, very important. But going back to the Normandy Format talks, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is expected to meet with Kremlin leader Vladimir Putin. Some analysts have suggested that Putin will employ so-called FSB tactics, and it's no secret about his former his background in the FSB in Russia's security service. So, what sort of strategy do you think President Zelensky needs to adopt when it comes to negotiating with Putin?
Well, firstly, he needs to rely on the Ukrainian people and the parliament, because the majority of Ukrainians define the way or the red lines that any president, not just Zelensky, should not cross. And we've seen it in 2016 when President Poroshenko was trying to impose some changes into the constitution, and we've seen a lot of people on the constitutional square, and there was a tragedy, and several police officers has been killed. So Ukrainian people are not going to tolerate any limitation of Ukrainian sovereignty, meaning that we are not going to give up on our aspiration to join NATO and the European Union. This is no deal thing. Secondly, President Zelensky may say that, and he actually, one of the good things he has done, two things. Firstly, when he was elected, Russia introduced passports for those occupied by Russia territories.
And that was kind of the first test, sort of posturing that Putin was doing with that.
Yeah, and it was a good response from Zelensky. He said that nobody wants the Russian passport because it's a passport. With this passport, you get in right of being beaten by the police or in jail or other things related to non-democratic government. And second thing, recently he said that I do not need to change any legislation to protect my citizens. By saying this, he is just saying that it's impossible to change Ukrainian constitution to provide any sort of autonomy for occupied by Russia Donetsk and Lugansk. And secondly, it's going about the requirement from this Minsk Accords to drop all charges against those who committed crimes. And actually, Ukrainian human rights activists are strictly against this, because impunity is something that is spoiling the whole system, the whole legal system, and it's in contradiction of the whole idea of human rights. So Zelensky sent several signals. At the same time, positive thing that he can sell, at least to the general public, that he is focused on the rights of the people and their well-being. And we've seen that in Stanitsa Luhanska checkpoint, where there is a division line, and the bridge has been damaged.
That's been key, really, because the work on the bridge, that was really the connecting point between the two sides.
Oh, yes.
And just even efforts going to, restore it has been seen as a huge plus, I suppose, for President Zelensky.
Oh, yeah. So we see some progress. The Russian proxies just demolished the defensive structure there. So there is a possibility of Ukrainian, let's say, government to deploy the construction workers and to rebuild this bridge to allow the local people to interchange and to get access to Ukrainian free territory, to get food or any sort of services from the government. So it's a good signal, and certainly some other positive signals that Zelensky is trying to be a peace president. He's saying that I have a relatively narrow window of opportunity. I need to use it. I am determined to stop the war. Actually, President Prystayko was saying the same thing, but Russians were advancing, and certainly there is no the right environment for achieving peace. So we see some possibilities of that. I'm not sure that this conflict will be solved. I believe it's going to be frozen by Russia, because they are not going to achieve the key strategy against Ukraine. At the same time, they are not going to leave this territory, so it possibly will be sort of a new Abkhazia or South Ossetia or Transnistria.
So no setbacks, no visible setbacks, and no visible progress is what you think. We'll be keeping an eye on that, and we'll look forward to speaking with you next.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you very much. That was Oleksandr Khara, an expert on foreign and security policy at the Maidan of Foreign Affairs. You're watching UATV. Stay tuned for more.